Hi. We are going to go ahead and get started. Wait for Brenda and Henry. Welcome, Brenda and Henry. It's really nice to see you all here tonight. Please excuse my voice. I've been dealing with a throat thing. I'm 𝘍𝘍𝘬𝘮. I'm curator of modern and contemporary art here at the 𝘋𝘬𝘮, and I'm so excited to welcome you to this evening's Visiting Artist Talk with David Alabo, who has 5 works featured in our exhibition Dream Machine, Fantasy, Surreality, and Play. And I know we usually gush over our visiting artists and scholars. I think we just have a knack for selecting incredible people to work with. But my coworkers and I have had a truly wonderful time these past 2 days getting to know David, learning more about his life, and his work and his future plans. And I know I speak for the whole museum staff when I say, David, you're now part of the family. You've just acquired 10 new relatives in Wichita, and we will be visiting you in Accra at the same time and staying with you. Just putting that out there. Before introducing David properly, as you know, we like to first turn to the calendar and let you know what's coming up at the 𝘋𝘬𝘮. All of our programs are always free to attend, just so everybody knows. Next Friday, November 15th at 5:30, there will be a student dance performance in the Polk Wilson Gallery. It's choreographed by Assistant Professor and Director of the Wichita State Dance Program, Mina Estrada, and it's inspired by our exhibition Dream Machine. The piece is entitled Inside the Dream Machine, and it plays on the intricate layers of reality and fantasy and surrealism, and will include live music performed by ICT Us, directed by Chase Hampton. And then the dance piece will continue to evolve as it is transformed into a film produced in collaboration with the School of Digital Arts, which will premiere at the Welsbacher Black Box Theater on April 19th, 2025. So that's really exciting. Just a big project in the making. So please join us November 15th, 5:30 for that performance. On Thursday, November 21st, we're welcoming former civil rights and disability rights attorney Kate Nicholson. Some of you know Kate, to the 𝘋𝘬𝘮 for a compelling talk in connection with our exhibition Repose. Nicholson founded the National Pain Advocacy Center, a nonprofit that advocates for the health and human rights of people in pain. And her presentation will include her incredible journey to recovery after a surgical injury left her bedridden for nearly 20 years. It should be quite the inspirational and insightful evening, so we hope you'll join us November 21st. And then finally on Saturday, November 23rd, we're going to host a holiday art cheer makers and masterpieces community event for all ages. It's going to feature hands-on art making with the Wichita State Printmaking Guild, ornament creation, seasonal activities, live music, and a bake sale. Sounds lovely. So grab your crew and join us from noon to 2 o'clock on that Saturday afternoon, November 23rd. Okay, now to introduce David, I would like to first quote you. I've used this quote to open a few presentations about curating Dream Machine. Quote, we're being fed so much information about our reality, we want to see things that maybe don't exist, end quote. And you said this last year in an interview. For David, seeing things that don't exist aptly describes the sort of world building that he applies to his practice, creating not just environments, but languages, rules, characters, and symbols. And the part in the quote about being fed information about our reality, well, that would be the passive approach to existing that is the very catalyst for his boundary pushing and his impulse to subvert and to challenge the status quo, to not accept things as they are, but to imagine what they could be. This is an artist who naturally, organically lives out on the edge of the forward motion, so much so that he doesn't even realize that that's not the normal, comfortable place to be. If he's connected to the present, it seems that it's a connection teetering on the cliff of the next thing. Truly, I've just experiencing his point of view the past few days is just, it's striking. And what strikes me most about David's point of view, though, is that even though he imagines these new futures in these visual snapshots of his created universe, he acknowledges that the future can only exist in response to the past and what's come. So there has to be an understanding of the past to even imagine a future, because the future is always reactionary. And David's work weaves the two together within a world that he creates entirely, including the visual language through which to interpret that world. David's research interests and creative pursuits are centered on Afro-Surrealism and Afrofuturism, and both movements are reflected in his work, merged with elements from his diverse cultural background, his life experiences, and his passion for storytelling. His work has led him to collaborations with HBO, Meta, Apple, Adobe, Wired Magazine, Allure, and Daily Paper, and he's captured the attention of national outlets such as CNN in the past 5 years, reflecting his unique perspective within the global art community. Born in Rome, raised all over in countries like Russia and India, and now based back in his family's home country of Ghana. We're so excited to have him now here in Wichita. So please help me welcome David Alabo.
Hi, everyone. Well, let me put this up a little bit so you can hear me. Wow, thank you so much for having me here. I truly don't take this for granted. You know, it's an honor to be brought all the way out here from Ghana, where I'm based, not only to, you know, show my work, but also to be here to share a little bit about my story and where I come from. And hopefully, I believe by the end of this talk, you can understand a little bit more about myself, but also have the opportunity to reflect on your own life and use my work and my story as a mirror to understand each of ourselves a little bit better. So, my name is David Alabo. I'm a visual artist, multidisciplinary artist from Accra, Ghana, and my background is a little bit complicated. It's a little bit complex. So my mother is from Morocco and my father is from Ghana. So I've always had a very diverse, multicultural upbringing, and that has quite strongly shaped the way I view the world and the way I create art, you know, because growing up, I used to follow my father around a lot, and he used to work in a lot of different countries, you know, so I've always been blessed to experience so much of the world, and also to see myself as a black person in a lot of different spaces. And I think that informs the African element of my work, you know, and I am always asking myself the question that, what does it mean to be a black person in this world today? And that's the question that sort of always comes back to my mind whenever I'm thinking about what I want to create or what it is that I want to share with the world. And so my work exists sort of at the intersection between Afrofuturism and Surrealism. And I want to see raise a hand at anybody who knows the term Afrofuturism. Amazing, amazing. So for those that don't know, Afrofuturism is a movement that started in the 70s mainly, but has grown to sort of, you know, encompass a wider range of both, you know, film, art, music, and all sorts of media, you know. And for me, I'll give you my definition of what I think Afrofuturism is. And for me, Afrofuturism is imagination. And imagination from the perspective of an African person. And what I say imagination in the sense that I'm talking about speculating or trying to recreate or imagine what it means to be a black person in the present, in the past, and in the future. And the element of surrealism comes across in my work in the sense that when I'm talking to you about sort of this multicultural upbringing, I'm thinking about the fact that a lot of the times when I was, you know, whether I was in Russia, or whether I was in India, or whether I was in Italy where I was born, it always felt quite surreal to be a black person in these spaces, you know, and in a sense that my experiences were a lot of the times took a long time for me to sort of process and come to terms with, you know, and the whole experience sometimes of being a black person can be quite surreal in terms of the fact that you have to deal with things that do sort of take you a little bit out of reality and have you ask quite profound questions about yourself. And so the aim of my work has always been to sort of challenge what we think being African means, you know, by virtue of the fact that I have a quite unique upbringing, you know, I still, other than my sister, I have not met another Ghanaian-Moroccan. So if you know anybody out there, let me know. That would be amazing, you know. So I think I try to create stories, I try to create narratives that challenge and expand on what we traditionally have always thought it meant to be African. You know, so I have a little quote that I wrote that's like, you know, my work invites audiences to sort of reimagine identity and memory as fluid, open to new interpretations and cultural connections. And what I mean by that is that my art has always been a way for me to make sense of my upbringing and make sense of the way I grew up, and to imagine that not in a negative light, but in a way that can inspire people, in a way that can bring hope to people, you know. And I think it's important to be optimistic. I think it's important to bring hope into a world that is quite negative, let's be honest. And, you know, we're always sort of in a world that we're overfed and overstimulated with information. And a lot of the times, this information can be quite negative. So I think it's quite a radical, revolutionary thing to aim to inspire optimism and hope and empower people that look like me or don't look like me to really see the world in a slightly better light, you know? So yeah, these are some of my works. I believe the one on the left is called Life on the Horizon, and the other one is called Watchdog. And, you know, I always try to bring a lot of symbology and imagery into my work, and I try to create worlds and build worlds that transport you from reality, but not in a way that is escapist. I think it's important to see the work as more of a transcendental meditative healing as opposed to escapism, because I believe that I want the audiences or people that see my work to not escape from reality, but to be able to take some time to be introspective, take some time to reflect on life, and then go back and look at reality with a fresh lens, you know. And if you look at a lot of my work, hopefully if you've seen it in the 𝘍𝘢𝘯𝘵 Museum, a lot of the subjects are quite based in solitude, or are sharing moments and spaces where they are just alone. And that goes back to the theme of allowing people and allowing ourselves to actually have time to reflect and have time to be introspective. I believe in a world that is so noisy, you know, and I mean noisy in the sense that we barely really have time these days to sit down and have moments of quietness. And I hope that whenever you see my work, or whenever you give space and time to my work, that it allows you to reflect, you know, and it allows you to ask yourself questions about what it means to be yourself, or what it means to process your own heritage, your own memories of your life. And I think that's a big part of why I do what I do. And so this is more of a manifestation of the previous work. So that shows you a little bit about my process. You know, I create worlds, I build animations, or I build still images, but I'm very much I'm very much interested in how I can merge the digital with the physical. As much as I'm a digital artist and I'm always asking myself, what tools and what technology can I use to represent myself, at the same time, I'm very much interested in bridging or bringing my ideas into more tangible forms. So Contours of Memory and Watchdog, as you see, were sculptures that I worked on, and I used all sorts of quite innovative techniques, including 3D printing and just physical sculpting in order to bridge the gap between the physical and the digital. Oops, sorry about that. And why is it that I'm interested in digital art? You know, as a futurist, and more specifically as an Afrofuturist, I think it's important to be very much interested in what technologies that we use and what it is that surrounds us in the world. You know, I think the reason that I'm so interested in digital art is because I've always been somebody that's been really interested in software, has always been tinkering around with programs and all of the sorts. And I wasn't really born knowing that I wanted to do art, you know. It's been something that I think I found much later in my life, and in a sense, like I said before, has quite helped me to understand and put together and make sense of my own world, you know. So for me, I think if we live in a world that we're always sort of surrounded by screens, we're always surrounded by technology, it's important to place myself in a place where I can show people that, or represent my cultural upbringing or my heritage by using these tools to create art, you know. And I think it's important to be at the forefront of what technology is, you know, whether it's the way AI or artificial intelligence has kind of entered the mainstream and entered our consciousness. And we know we all ask these questions about what it means to live in a world where machines are doing a lot of the thinking for us, you know. And the job, I think my job is to ask questions of not only what technologies are we using, but who's using them, who's consuming them, and who's building them. So I think it's important to note that I'm an active participant and consumer of technology, but at the same time, I am well aware of the systems and the inherent biases that we have in the technology. So I think me creating art using these technologies and building software and tinkering around with all sorts of things is an active step in making sure that there is representation in the technology that's used. And, you know, a lot of the times I ask myself, like, with my work, is a lot of what ifs, you know, imagining different scenarios, both of the present, the future, and the past, you know. I don't think it's fair to imagine a future without thinking about the past. You know, I think the past informs the future informs the past. It's a conversation that always happens, right? And so a lot of what I do is speculative futures, or imagining speculative futures. And I think my big thing, my big goal is always that we have a quite defined version of what we think the future is. And a lot of it is based on, let's be honest, quite Western-dominated ideas of science fiction or what the future looks like. And I think whenever I'm trying to create stuff, I'm always trying to break away from the molds of what we think the future might look like. You know, and a lot of that involves decolonizing this idea of imagining the future. And a lot of the times, we have to build upon, we not only have to build upon what has happened in the past, but we also have to break away from it in order to imagine new futures. And a lot of the times when I'm asked, what do you imagine the future to be like? Is it utopian or dystopian? I'm always like, that's not really a fair question, because when you actually think about it, when you think about a utopia, it's quite a singular vision of the future, in the sense that a utopia doesn't necessarily involve the thoughts and doesn't allow inclusiveness of many different ideas of what the future looks like. So my friend Monica Belunsky, who's also an amazing futurist, brought up the idea of prototopias. And prototopias sort of is a radical sort of change to what we think about utopia versus dystopia, in the sense that it's very much big on including a multitude of ideas and a multitude of versions of what the future would look like. So inherently, it's a way for people to come together and think about the future, but not in a way that excludes anybody, and I think that's really important. So yeah, this is also my depiction of a world that is not necessarily dystopian, but it's a world that has been plagued by the damages of environmental change, and I think I've always had a very strong belief in how we treat the world, how we imagine the way our world is. We can't have a future where we're all in pain or in suffering or in misery, and my job as a futurist is not only to imagine the good, the bad, but also to imagine what ifs, So this is a piece I called Barren, where we have a sort of skeletal being riding through a fictional universe, which could represent Earth, it could represent us on another planet, but I always try to involve symbols of resilience, but in a context where they've been damaged, they've been taken apart, and they've been broken down. And I think it's important to always have symbols or imageries that people can associate with resilience and strength and empowerment, even in a world that's bleak. And that goes back to this theme of always trying to, even in the most bleakest of cases, inspire people or let people imagine that there is still hope in this world. And a little bit about my process, right? This first picture that I created sort of speaks to this idea of the past and the future connecting. So what we have here in the first one is a classic Benin sculpture from West Africa, which I recreated in 3 dimensions in software. And we have a subject sort of in this bleak landscape, kind of this minimalist, empty landscape, coming into contact with this symbol of ancestral African heritage, and what does it mean to connect, So in a way, I am visualizing in a quite direct way what it means to be face-to-face with themes from our past, images and sculptures from our past, and reflecting it through my software, through my technology, and creating images. That, in its essence, for me, is Afrofuturism, because the futurism part of my method is weaving in classic African concepts, ideas, stories, imageries, feeding it through current technology and seeing how that comes about. So it's a reinterpretation of classical African ideas, but whenever you put it through software, whenever you put it through technology of our days, I always feel like the result is going to be different, And it asks yourself, it asks you questions about how do I see this? How do I feel about this? And then the second image is a question, I call it the watcher's dilemma. And what that means is that, what does it mean to actually have vision? Or what does it mean to actually bear the weight of your own sight or your own ability to see things, And that's kind of depicted in a way where we have a figure, and I'm always quite big on having androgynous figures or figures that don't quite represent anybody, because I want everybody to see themselves in it. As much as I'm an Afrofuturist, as much as I'm somebody that is steeped in expressing the visions of Black people, I always want everybody to be able to take something from it, And that speaks to sort of my own universal upbringing, and I think that's really important. So that piece sort of speaks to the weight of vision, the burden of revelation. What does it mean to see the world as it is, and in a way, how heavy knowing something can be on you, And then the third one is, I think, a great depiction of what it means to be in solitude, And I think a lot of the times in the world we live in, it's almost seen as bad to be alone, And I'm trying to subvert this idea that being in solitude is actually a blessing, Because right now, like I said before, there's so much noise, there's constant influx of information, whether good or bad. So to see these people in spaces where they're alone is not a bad thing, because I try to depict solitude in a positive way, in a way that you see these figures, even though they're by themselves, are quite held in positions of wondering what the world is around them, wondering what it means to be in these unknown lands or these strange places, but feeling a sense of empowerment from it and seeing them navigate these spaces where they're not quite sure what's happening, but seeing that, okay, maybe if I'm also in spaces where I'm not sure where I am, or I'm not necessarily quite sure what's happening around me, I'm still going to hold myself in a high esteem, or I'm still going to lift my shoulders up and I'm going to be empowered by it, So that's a little bit about how my thinking goes through it. And it all ties back to my own upbringing, where I would be a lot of the times like the only black person in a place, and trying to figure out how to navigate that world was a challenge in itself, but not something I see negatively. I think that's always given me that sense of self-worth and self-esteem, and it's always kind of boosted myself, And if I can go through that in my life, I want to make sure that the subjects in my art transmit that sense of, possibility, And where does surrealism come into all of this? Like I said, the experience of a black person can be quite surreal, but I think surrealism is quite amazing because it taps into this sort of uncanny valley where, you have things juxtaposed with each other that don't quite make sense, or things are a little bit weird, And I think this dreamlike state, or exploring the subconscious, is actually a way to break boundaries, and allow everybody to see themselves in the artwork, And creating these kind of dreamlike states where things don't quite make sense actually allows you to, think about identity in a more open, fluid way, And it allows that subconscious space to be a space where you can imagine completely new futures and alternate realities. And I think my job, and the question I ask myself a lot is that in thinking about the future, or in thinking about different ways we can explore the future, I also have to think about different ways, different versions, or different alternate versions of the past, Because a lot of the times, the art or whatever is depicted about art in the present is quite steeped in very painful histories that have dealt with really, really horrible suffering and tragedy, whether it's colonialism, whether it's slavery, whether it's oppression. These are all topics that are really quite difficult to deal with, but you can't ignore them, And I feel like the person, a futurist, or somebody that calls themselves a futurist, has to sort of walk that fine line between imagining new futures while still paying respect to the past, because these things did happen. These things are real. But at the same time, you can't let that limit the way you depict the future. So a lot of it is a very delicate balance between honoring the past, but not allowing that to really affect or really define all your visions or depictions of the future. And again, yeah, this goes back to this idea of what it means to be a futurist, you know, by respecting the past and allowing that, but not allowing that to constrain the way we see the future, you know, and seeing the past as a resource in the sense that you can always draw from it, but it also doesn't necessarily have to be the only source of how you see the future. So this piece, Justice, that I created was actually in the wake of I created it, I believe, in 2020, after the wake of the George Floyd murder, where, you know, it was a very tense time. It was a time of a lot of strong emotions, and for me, the way I tried to depict it was to create sort of this surreal scenario where we have a Black Panther, which is a symbol of resilience, holding a sword with the words justice on it, at the same time holding a rose, you know, in honor and memory of somebody that had passed away, you know, due to some extremely unfortunate circumstances. So this is a good example of how I try to create images that, for me, depict a time and depict a state of mind I was in, where it was quite painful. It was quite a tough time to make sense of the world. But you have a picture, you have a vision of a character looking forward into the future, looking forward into the open expanse. And I'm sure you can relate to this, where you feel a sense of strength in the picture. You feel a sense of optimism. And of course you have the tear kind of rolling down from the sword, a metal chrome tear, imagining that, yeah, even in this face of extreme pain, you can still be optimistic. You can still hope for a better future, you know, and that's for me is very important. It's extremely important. So, yeah, I think this piece, I call it Mosaic, which I think is also a testament to sort of the ideas and the ideologies that I think. And this is more of a piece that talks about the reverence to spirituality, you know, a reverence to African mythology. You know, in Ghana, when we think about the elephant is the one that created nature, is the one that when it steps on the ground, it actually breaks the ground and allows new life to form. So that's a story that I was told since I was a kid. So I try to imagine in this world where we have a sort of chrome, elegant elephant sort of marching even in a kind of static position in the back, you know, sort of a testament to this constant creation of life. And then you have this character, or this human, sort of paying reverence in a symbol, you know, with the hands closed in front of themselves, going up and down, sort of paying respect to this surroundings. And then you have all the people in front. These are all versions of ourselves, you know, looking at, it's almost like a conversation you're having with yourself, in that you're looking at this version of yourself that is one that pays respect to nature, one that honors tradition, and one that is steeped in their own knowledge of the past and how that influences their version and depictions of the future. So this piece, I believe I exhibited it a few years ago, but I still feel it holds quite strong relevance, you know, and it just goes back to this theme of always appreciating nature. Nature is the constant in this world. Nature is the one thing that will survive us all. So I think it's important to respect it and pay tribute to it. And I believe that was my sort of thinking behind the piece. And yeah, I just want to say thank you for exploring this journey of speculative futures with me. I invite you to see this work not only as a understanding of my own journey and where I came from and how I see the future, but as a chance for you to also think about what it means to view your own heritage, to view your own dreams, your own memories, to sort of make sense of your own life and hopefully allow that to, you know, influence your depictions of the future or your own visions of the future in one that's hopefully an optimistic one that inspires hope not only in yourself, I think also inspires hope in other people, because what's a world if you're the only one inspired, you know? You got to make sure that the people around you are also inspired, and I hope through the works that we're exhibiting at the 𝘍𝘢𝘊 Museum, it gives you a chance to take some time, think about yourself, think about where you come from, and yeah, and hopefully have a positive and optimistic sense of the future. So thank you so much for listening to me. I hope you learned something. And I want to open the floor up to anybody that has any questions. I'd be happy to talk. Yes, please.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that, like, early on you had the thing about multidimensional and then world building.
Yeah.
That was very interesting. And then just shortly after that, you mentioned the past. And I thought, because as soon as I see dimension, I always think of time.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. And also, that thing that looks like an eye,
Yeah.
when it was tilted like this,
Yeah.
with the black figure, with the right arm out and the two legs, I thought it was a shield at first, like he's going to grab it from behind his left hand. It was before this. It's kind of slanted, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
I thought his left hand was going to grab it from behind, it was going to be a shield of some kind. I don't know why I thought.
Exactly. I mean, like, that's a great question. I think, you know, when I think about the concept of time, you know, I think a lot of the times we depict time as quite a linear thing, you know, past, present, future. But when you actually look into sort of West African depictions of what it means, what time means, especially in the Yoruba culture, time is cyclical, you know? Time doesn't just go from point A to B, it always loops around in a way, right? So I think that's what I meant by the past informs the future and the future informs the past, you know? And exactly, like, I think this piece almost is depicting like I said, the weight of having that vision, but it's almost like somebody's pushing something forward, you know? There's still that sense, even in a still image, in something that's flat, you're still getting a sense of that this is a snapshot into something that is happening, you know? So it's almost like somebody's rolling that eye, rolling that vision, you know? So that's how I'm trying to depict a surreal interpretation of the burden of knowing something, you know? And so I think that's something that I'm glad you picked up on. And yeah, I think it does look like a shield. I mean, I think knowing something protects you as well, right? Yeah. Knowing something can protect you in the sense that knowledge can inform your decisions, inform your next step. And so, again, like, as much as I'm giving you my interpretation of the work, I think it's so important that everybody finds their own interpretation from the work, because all I'm doing is sharing my vision, but it's also, like I said, a mirror for you to ask yourself your own questions about your life, you know? I mean, I can tell you a little bit why the works I do use have quite a strong sense of color, and there's quite a strong sense of this vibrant hues or these vibrant gradients, because, like, I don't know if I've been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I have synesthesia, in that, like, the way I see colors is like I see colors in, like, I'm sure a lot of people, I see it in moods, I see it in feelings, I see it in emotions, I see it in, like, for me, the color is as much a tool in my palette as any symbology in the piece, you know? How does the colors affect you, you know? And how does that serve as sort of like a backdrop for the questions or the themes that I'm exploring on top of it, you know? So I see it as a canvas or a foundation on which you can build a story, you know, in a singular image, you know? And yeah, I almost forgot to share something a little bit about my own process, in that this is I'm not sure if you can tell, but it's a self-portrait of me. So what I did was I actually scanned my face in 3 dimensions using my phone, because now phones have LiDAR scanners in it. So I was able to scan my whole face and then have rebuild it in 3D, and then put it into some of the worlds I create, you know. And for this piece, talks a bit more about how, you know, a figure looking up into the sky, you know, and this goes back to this idea that I think my father had told me, that like a man, and in a man I mean everybody, like a man is an island, you know. You're your own culmination of your experiences, your thoughts, and it's important to look out for yourself, you know, and take care of yourself and see yourself as a vessel for not only inspiring yourself, but like people look to you, you know, people look to you for whether it's hope, reassurance, and anything like that. So that just shows you a little bit about how I work, you know. It's a lot of the times I'm asking myself quite deep questions, but the way in which I filter it is through technology. The way I filter it is through software, is through being sort of at the cutting edge of whatever it is that's happening. And for me, that's the futurist aspect of my work. The surrealist aspect comes in that I try to like create images that are just make you feel a little bit like, like how would I imagine myself in this space, you know? So I think that's a good example of a little bit about my process. So if there are any other questions, I'd love, yeah, please.
Where do you create your work in?
What do I create my work in? So it's a lot of different like programs. Essentially, I use a lot of the times when I'm sculpting or when I'm creating models, I'll create them in virtual reality. So I'll put like on a headset, because when I first started creating, I was like, this feels flat in the sense that like I'm working on a screen, and if I'm trying to world build or create in 3D, I want to be able to move and experience things in 3D, you know? And I had never really owned a headset. I was talking with Joe earlier about it. I never really owned a headset, VR headset. And when I got a commission from HBO, I think this was during the pandemic, they came to me with a question like, how do we explore this theme of social connection in a world that's isolated, right? And we were tinkering, talking about what we could do, and they were like, how about we recreate one of your pieces in virtual reality, and as a sort of experiment to see if we can create some sort of connection in the world where everybody was stuck in their rooms or stuck in their homes. And it was quite, you know, a morbid, depressing time, but how can we create this sense of like connection, you know? So I got the headset from them, and from there I was able to actually expand on it and been able to create stuff by actually putting myself in the worlds I'm creating, as opposed to just a quite flat version of the screen, you know? And then I use like a variety of like different programs to sculpt landscapes, to sculpt worlds, whether it's Blender, Cinema 4D, all of these. And then after that, there's obviously the post-processing, where I try to really finesse and really try to tinker with the colors, like I said, because like for me, like the feeling you get from looking at a piece through the colors alone can greatly impact the way you see the work or the way it makes you feel. And then obviously sometimes when it comes out, like I said, and whether it's like I make a 3D print of this and put it as a sculpture on a wall, that's like the next manifestation of the piece, you know? So it's always about trying to put it through as many different programs, or because at the end of the day, I'm researching, I'm experimenting, you know? I'm trying to find a new way to in this case, represent myself, you know, just to remind myself like, you know, like I could be like, you know, in the ocean looking up at the sky, you know, and again, it goes back to this theme of like, you know, you're looking outwards, you're looking into an expanse beyond the frames of the artwork, you know? And I think in that sense, it's like almost I'm trying to depict myself asking these questions, you know? So that's like a long-winded way to tell you that I use like a lot of different things, you know? But I'm always trying to, you know, I don't want to be too comfortable, you know? I don't want to sit there and be like, this is my method, because my method is always evolving, and I'm always trying to challenge myself to be at the forefront of technology, you know? Because at the end of the day, like I said, beyond just being a futurist, I'm an Afrofuturist, you know? So I have to be not only consuming the art, but I have to be an active participant in using it, building it if I can, you know? So I work a lot with like Adobe, I work a lot with other companies to try to like give a diverse interpretation of software, you know, and make sure that all voices are included, you know, in that very kind of technical aspect. I think it's a representation of the fact that I want my work, or I want the pieces that I create to feel inclusive, you know, to feel like everybody is involved, because otherwise then we have a quite homogeneous output, you know. And I think that you need as much diversity in the input if you want to have output that speaks to everybody, you know. So that's the fine line I sort of play between making art that's truly reflective of my Black experience, but at the same time isn't alienating other people from the work, you know. I want everybody to feel like they can get something from the work and they can feel a part of it, you know, but it's still at the same time know that this is a person that's trying to make sense of their own identity, you know, and ask yourself, how do I make sense of my own identity? I don't know if that makes, it makes sense, yeah? No, it's a great question, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, please. Yeah, all the way from Ghana, yeah. Thank you so much.
It sounds like you are a true surrealist.
Mm-hmm.
Using tools to explore ideas. I related a lot to your narrative of jumping from one country or continent to another. I was curious to just learn, how are you incorporating yourself from these places?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's currently really in one place, but you go in another, and it kind of jumps around. So how do you see it from reality to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much. I feel like, you know, a lot of the times, if you notice, a lot of my work is dealing with deserts, dealing with landscapes, you know, and I feel like that's a lot of it is the Moroccan version of my upbringing. You know, when you think about the desert, it's a quite harsh and unforgiving place, right? And I think that that's a quite accurate depiction of the world. You know, sometimes it can be quite harsh and unforgiving, but if you notice, the people where I'm from, which is like more the Berber region, people that have lived in the mountains of Morocco have found a way to thrive in places that they shouldn't be thriving, you know. And beyond just surviving, they're thriving, you know. And I think that speaks to this message that I've been kind of reinforcing through the presentation of like, I don't want my work to just be a depiction of survival, you know, because a lot of the times, African art, to generalize it, has been quite steeped in pain and suffering, you know, which is not to say that didn't happen, or to not consider that reality, but at the same time, you have to depict people beyond just survival. You know, you have to depict them thriving, you know, seeing themselves in unfamiliar places, but still upholding and transmitting a sense of power, or a sense of like, I might be in a foreign, unfamiliar land, but there's still I still can navigate it, and beyond just navigating and surviving it, I can thrive. So that's a bit about how the Moroccan side of my family comes in, or the Moroccan side of my own experience, you know. My sister was actually not born, but she was raised in Morocco. I've only been visiting since I was a child, you know, so she could probably have a much stronger idea about that, but that's one version or one way in which I bring that in, you know. So I try to take these landscapes or these environments and then bring them into the work, but beyond that, I try to understand what it means to be in these kind of spaces, you know. And another part I would say is, again, when I grew up, a lot of like places where I was like the only person or the only black person in these spaces, I never saw it as a negative. I always saw it as a chance to show people or give people a little taste of what it means to be from where I am, or to show them a little bit of how my people are, you know? So in a way, you are kind of like representing not just yourself, but like wherever you come from, you know? So these are sort of the ideas that go in my head whenever I'm thinking about depicting characters in sort of unknown spaces, you know, because that's true to the way I grew up, you know, and I always found strength in myself. I always found myself as my own world, you know. I always found safety and comfort in my own imagination, you know. So I think I always carried that with me. I always found ways to be creative. I always found ways to sort of understand myself a little bit better, you know. And for me, that's why I'm always grateful to have found art, because, like I said, it kind of helped me make sense of a quite complicated or complex upbringing, you know. So yeah, I hope that answers a little bit about that. Yeah. Anyone else? Please. Yeah, of course.
So, let me see if I can get this right.
Of course.
I'm kind of interested in symbolism and grain,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of our cultural context kind of fills up our inner library, right, of symbols. And what comes, I wonder how much of your dreams and symbolism from dreams comes into your art, and how living in these different cultures, I don't know what age,
Yeah.
but if you notice symbols that come up from other places that you've lived, that are going on with other, because I notice like symbolism that comes in from not just my own lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like not just my own cultural context.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that I lived, but it's something that my ancestors experienced.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder what your experience is.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, you know, I think that goes back to why I'm so drawn to surrealism, because it feels hazy. It feels like you're not quite sure what is real and what's not real, you know. And I think a lot of the times I'm looking back into my own life, but whenever you look back into your own past, it's never truly accurate to what was experienced at the time. You know, whenever you look back at the past, it's always filtered through whatever you've experienced up until that point, you know. So that's why I feel like everybody, in a way, as much as I'm exploring my own identity, the symbols or whatever it is I create is a reflection of all these places that I've been at, and all this influence of different inspirations have come from. But at the same time, a lot of what I do is very research based, you know. So in a sense, I'm looking at whether it's like the Adinkra symbols of Ghana. You know, Ghana has quite a rich history of symbolism, you know. But I don't try to depict it in a, like I'm looking at what I've seen and I'm putting it directly into the work, you know. I'm looking at maybe how I view them as a child, or I imagine how I would have felt about these pieces when I was younger, you know. So it's not to say that I don't, you know, I don't allow other influences to, you know, take hold and manifest in the work, but at the same time, in doing the research, in trying to always sort of understand more about my own history and culture, I'm also looking back at my past through that research I've done, or through the work that I'm doing in the present, you know. And again, goes back into this idea that we're talking about, that it's cyclical, you know. The future informs the present as much as the present informs the past, and vice versa. So it's hazy. It's a bit like it's a mixture or a pot of all of everything you've seen, you know. But it's up to you whenever you're creating. You always make decisions, you know. There's always points where you're asking, do I do this or do I do that, you know. And I think it's important to ask yourself why you're choosing one thing versus the other, you know. And that can reveal a lot about your own self, or your own sort of ideas, or what you think about anything really, you know. So it's a long-winded way of saying that I'm a culmination of all the multitude of experiences and places I've been, you know, and everything that I've absorbed in my life, not only from Ghana, not only from Morocco, but from wherever it is that I've been in the world, you know. And up until this day, I'm still absorbing and processing everything that I see in my life, or in the day. And whenever I dream or think about how I'm going to depict something, that definitely has an influence. I think the question becomes, what do you include and what do you not include, you know? And the distinction that you make says a lot about you, you know, says a lot about yourself. So I know it's not a direct answer to your question, but you know, it's how I think about it, you know. But yeah, this is a very thought-provoking question.
And it's our last of the evening. Thank you.
That's it?
Yeah. You did
Of course,
it.
of course.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.